The cathedral was breathtaking, but that day it felt like a stage for humiliation. Golden chandeliers shimmered above rows of nobles and dignitaries. The air carried the scent of roses and power, because this wasn't just a wedding, it was a treaty. A union meant to unite kingdoms and secure peace. And at the center of it all stood Princess Moira. Still, silent, smiling just enough to hide the storm inside her. Every second stretched painfully. Her hands trembled slightly around her bouquet. Her heart wasn't fluttering like a bride in love, it was sinking slowly, heavily as the whispers began. Where is the prince? Why hasn't he come out yet? She tried to breathe, tried to hold on to dignity. Then suddenly, the massive cathedral doors burst open. Not with music, not with celebration, but with urgency. A lone messenger rushed down the aisle, his face pale, his steps uneven, and in that moment Moira knew. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The entire room held its breath as he dropped to one knee before her, his voice echoing louder than it should have. Your Highness, Prince Jonan will not be coming. Silence. Then a whisper. Then a wave of shock crashing through the crowd. But the worst was yet to come. He has gone to be with his first love. The words didn't just land, they shattered. Moira didn't move. Couldn't move. Before hundreds of watching eyes, before allies and enemies alike, she had just been discarded. Not for duty, not for war. But for love. Not hers. The humiliation was suffocating. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. A princess does not break. Even when her world does. The whispers turned sharp now, judgmental, cruel. Pathetic. Abandoned at the altar. What will this mean for the treaty? She stood alone. Completely alone. Or at least she thought she was. Until a chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. The sound cut through the chaos like a blade. And suddenly the room fell silent again. Because someone had stood up. Not just anyone. The Alpha King. Rayland. The most dangerous man in the room. The one whose name was always spoken with equal parts fear and fascination. A ruler known for his power, his control, and his refusal to belong to anyone. Moira's breath caught as her eyes lifted. And met his. Dark, intense, unreadable. But there was something else there, something that made her pulse stutter. Something that felt like it had always been waiting. He didn't hesitate. Didn't look around. Didn't ask for permission. He simply stepped forward and began walking toward her. Each step echoed like fate itself had made a decision. Gasps rippled through the crowd. What is he doing? Surely not. But he didn't stop. Not until he stood right in front of her. Close enough for her to feel the heat of him, close enough for her heart to betray her completely. And then, the Alpha King spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a certainty that shook her far more than the betrayal ever could. Marry me instead. The world tilted. This wasn't part of any plan. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was the last man she should ever trust, the one man she had spent years avoiding because being near him felt like standing too close to fire. And now, he was offering to bind their lives together. Not for love, not for desire, but for survival. Or so he claimed. Because the way he looked at her said something entirely different. So tell me, how are you all doing today? Are you ready for a story filled with betrayal, tension, and a love that refuses to stay hidden? Trust me, you're going to want to stay till the very end of this one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It truly means a lot to us. Marry me instead. The words didn't just echo in the cathedral, they collided with everything Princess Moira thought she understood about her life. For a moment she forgot how to breathe. Her fingers tightened around her bouquet as she stared at Raylan, the Alpha King, standing before her like a storm she had spent years trying to outrun. Was this real, or had the humiliation finally broken her? A murmur rippled through the cathedral, growing louder with every passing second. This is madness, Alpha King. Is this some kind of joke? But Raylan didn't look at them, he only looked at her, steady, certain, unshaken. As if the chaos around them didn't matter, as if she was the only thing that did, Moira's throat tightened. She whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself, because that was the question burning through her chest. Why would a man like him, powerful, feared, untouchable, step into a moment like this, to save her, or to claim something he had always wanted? Raylan's gaze flickered, something unreadable passing through his eyes before he leaned slightly closer. Because, he said quietly, you don't deserve to stand here alone. Her heart stumbled, the words were simple, but they hit harder than the betrayal ever could. For just a second she almost believed him. But then reality crashed back in. This wasn't about kindness, this was politics, the broken treaty, the watching nobles, the fragile alliances hanging by a thread. She was still a pawn, just being moved by a different player. You expect me to agree to this? She asked, her voice steadier now though her pulse betrayed her. A flicker of something, amusement, challenge, touched Raylan's lips. I expect you to understand what happens if you don't. She did. If she walked away now, she wouldn't just be the princess who was abandoned, she would be the princess who failed her kingdom. The alliance would collapse. Her people would pay the price, her humiliation would become history, permanent, unforgiving. Moira swallowed hard, her gaze dropping for a fraction of a second as the weight of it all pressed down on her. This wasn't a choice, it was survival. When she looked back up at him, her eyes had changed, still wounded, still burning, but stronger. Say I agree, she said, her voice low, controlled. What exactly are you offering me, Your Majesty? Something shifted in Raylan's expression, subtle but there, respect. An alliance, he replied. A solution, a way to walk out of this with your crown intact. In return, she pressed, his answer came without hesitation. A marriage, the word hung between them, heavy, dangerous, binding. Moira let out a slow breath. A real one. Raylan's gaze darkened slightly as though the question amused him more than it should have. That depends on you. Her heart skipped, and she hated that it did. No, she wouldn't let this become something it wasn't. She couldn't afford that. Separate lives, she said firmly. Separate rooms. No expectations beyond what's necessary to maintain appearances. A pause, the kind that stretched just long enough to make her wonder if she had pushed too far. Then, agreed. Too easily, her brows pulled together slightly. That should have reassured her. So why did it feel like she had just stepped into something far more complicated? The officiant, who had been standing frozen in shock, suddenly cleared his throat nervously. Why, Your Majesties, should I proceed? All eyes were on them again, waiting, watching. Judging, Moira's chest tightened as she turned slightly, taking in the sea of faces. The same people who had witnessed her humiliation just minutes ago, now they would witness her decision. This moment would define her, break her or rebuild her. Slowly she turned back to Raylan, the man who had just changed the course of her life with a single sentence. This was dangerous, unpredictable, and possibly the only way forward. Her grip on the bouquet loosened as she made her choice. Proceed, she said. The word sent a shockwave through the cathedral, gasps, whispers, disbelief, but Moira stood tall. If she was going to do this, she would not do it as a victim, she would do it as a queen. The ceremony that followed felt surreal, the vows blurred, the words echoed, but one thing remained painfully clear. Raylan never looked away from her, not once, not when she spoke, not when she hesitated, not even when the final words were spoken. You may seal the union. Her breath caught, this was it. The point of no return. For a fraction of a second the world faded, no crowd, no kingdom, no politics, just her and him. Raylan stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his gaze searching hers as if looking for something deeper than permission. And then he kissed her, not softly, not gently, but with a certainty that sent a shiver through her entire body. It wasn't just for show, and they both knew it. When he finally pulled back, the cathedral erupted, some in applause, others in shock. But Moira barely heard any of it, because in that moment one terrifying truth settled deep in her chest. She hadn't just escaped humiliation. She had just bound herself to the most dangerous man she had ever known. And something told her, this wasn't going to be a simple arrangement, not even close. The thought lingered in Moira's mind long after the ceremony ended, long after the applause faded into uneasy murmurs, long after the cathedral doors closed behind them. Because now, it was real. No longer a performance. No longer a desperate solution in front of a watching crowd. She was married. To him. The Alpha King. Moira stood still as the grand carriage doors shut with a heavy thud, sealing them inside. The outside noise dulled instantly, replaced by a suffocating silence. Just the two of them. Finally alone. Her fingers tightened in her lap, the delicate fabric of her gown crumpling beneath her grip as her thoughts raced. What have I done? Across from her, Raylan sat like he owned the world, and perhaps he did. One arm rested casually against the side, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. But his eyes were on her. Watching, studying. Waiting. The weight of his gaze was too much. Moira turned her face slightly toward the window, her voice cutting through the silence before it could consume her. Let's make one thing clear. Her tone was steady, but it took everything in her to keep it that way. This marriage is an arrangement, nothing more. A pause. Then, a quiet, almost amused exhale. Of course it is. His voice was smooth, too smooth. It made her chest tighten. Moira turned back to him, her brows narrowing slightly. You agreed too quickly. Raylan's lips curved faintly, but there was something sharp beneath it. Would you have preferred I argued at the altar? That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean, Moira? Her name's. The way he said it, low, deliberate, sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. She straightened, forcing herself to hold his gaze. I mean, she said carefully, you didn't hesitate, not for a second. You stepped in like you were prepared. The words hung between them. Accusation. Suspicion. Something deeper. For the first time since this began, Raylan didn't respond immediately. His gaze shifted slightly, something darker flickering in his eyes, something she couldn't quite read. And that unsettled her more than anything. You think this was planned? He asked finally, his tone quieter now. I think, Moira replied, choosing each word with care, that you saw an opportunity and took it. A beat. Then another. The air in the carriage felt heavier. Thicker. Raylan leaned forward slightly, his presence suddenly filling the space between them in a way that made it hard to breathe. And if I did, he said. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't back down. Then I want to know what you gain from this. Because that was the truth beneath everything. No one like Raylan did anything without a reason. And she refused to be blind in her own marriage. For a moment he simply looked at her. Really looked at her. As if weighing how much to say or how much to hide. Then slowly he leaned back again. Control, he said. The word was simple. Cold. Calculated. Control of the narrative, control of the treaty, control of what could have turned into a political disaster. Moira held his gaze, searching for something, anything, that would tell her that was the full truth. But something inside her whispered that it was. Is that all? She asked quietly. His eyes didn't leave hers. No, he said. Her breath caught. The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was charged. Dangerous. What else? She pressed, her voice softer now despite herself. Raylan's gaze dropped briefly, to her lips then back to her eyes. And when he spoke again, his voice was lower. Peace of mind. Her brows drew together slightly. That doesn't make sense. It does to me. Frustration flickered through her. You're not answering the question. And you're asking the wrong one. The tension snapped tighter. Then enlighten me, she said, her patience thinning. Raylan leaned forward again, closer this time. Too close. Close enough that she could feel the heat of him, close enough that her body reacted before her mind could stop it. You should be asking, he said quietly, why I couldn't sit there and watch you be humiliated. Her breath hitched. The words struck something deep. Too deep. For a second she forgot how to respond. Forgot how to think. Because there it was again. That feeling. That this wasn't just strategy. That this wasn't just politics. That this was personal. But that didn't make sense. It couldn't. Moira pulled back slightly, putting space between them, space she desperately needed. You didn't do this for me, she said, though her voice wasn't as certain as she wanted it to be. Raylan didn't argue. Didn't insist. Didn't even deny it. Instead, he simply said, believe what you want. And somehow, that was worse. The carriage slowed. Then stopped. Moira's heart tightened as she glanced toward the window. The palace. His palace. Her new reality. A place that would now be her home, whether she was ready for it or not. Before she could gather her thoughts, the door opened. Cold air rushed in. Reality rushed in with it. Raylan stepped out first, as expected, but then he turned back and held out his hand. A simple gesture. Expected. Necessary. But when Moira looked at it, it didn't feel simple. Because this wasn't just a step out of a carriage. It was a step into something unknown. Something dangerous. Something that was already beginning to feel far too real. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a sharp electric tension passed between them, quick, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Raylan's fingers tightened slightly around hers. Not enough to hurt. Just enough to hold. To steady. To claim. And as she stepped out beside him, into the eyes of a waiting kingdom, one truth settled heavily in her chest. This marriage may have started as an arrangement. But nothing about it was going to stay simple. Not with him. Not with the Alpha King. The realization lingered in Moira's chest as her feet touched the palace ground, solid, cold, and far too real. The towering gates loomed behind them, shutting with a deep, echoing thud that seemed to seal her fate. There was no turning back now. A line of guards stood at attention. Servants bowed their heads, nobles watched from a distance, their expressions carefully masked, but their curiosity was impossible to hide. She could feel it. Their questions, their judgment. The abandoned bride, now the Alpha Queen. Moira lifted her chin slightly, forcing her posture into something regal, unshaken. If they expected to see weakness, they would be disappointed. But beside her, Raylan's hand was still holding hers. Firm, warm, unyielding. A silent reminder that this was no longer just her burden to carry. Smile, he murmured under his breath, his voice barely audible. Her lips tightened slightly. I'm not in the mood. Neither am I, he replied calmly, but they don't need to know that. Moira exhaled slowly. Of course. This was part of the arrangement. Appearances. Control. Power. Slowly she allowed a faint smile to form, not genuine but convincing enough. Immediately the atmosphere shifted. Whispers softened, heads bowed deeper, the narrative was already changing. Not abandoned. Chosen. Claimed. And the man beside her was the one shaping that story. They moved forward together, step by step, until the massive palace doors opened. The interior was breathtaking, vast ceilings, polished marble floors, walls lined with history and authority. But Moira barely noticed any of it. Because the moment they crossed the threshold, Raylan let go of her hand. Just like that. The warmth vanished. The connection severed. And the absence of it was unsettling. She hadn't expected that. You'll be shown to your chambers, he said, his tone now distant, professional, like the man in the carriage had never existed. Moira blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. My chambers, she repeated. Yes. Her brows drew together. Not ours. Raylan's gaze flickered to hers briefly, something unreadable passing through his eyes before it disappeared just as quickly. That was part of your condition, he reminded her. Separate lives, separate rooms. Right. She had said that. She had insisted on it. So why did hearing it now feel wrong? I assumed that was just for appearances, she said quietly. A pause. Raylan studied her for a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to understand something she wasn't even sure she understood herself. Careful, Moira, he said softly. You're starting to sound like you want something different. Her breath caught. I don't. The answer came too quickly. Too sharply. And they both knew it. A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps even satisfaction, touched his expression. Good, he said. But the word didn't feel reassuring. Not at all. A servant stepped forward, bowing deeply. Your Majesty, the Queen's chambers are prepared. Queen. The title hit differently now. Heavier. More bindings. Moira straightened slightly, gathering what remained of her composure. Lead the way. As she turned to follow, she felt it. His gaze. On her. Watching. Always watching. It sent a strange, unfamiliar tension through her chest. But she didn't turn back. Didn't give him the satisfaction. Not yet. Her chambers were overwhelming. Luxurious beyond reason. Soft fabrics, intricate designs, a balcony overlooking the entire kingdom. It was beautiful. And yet, it didn't feel like hers. Not yet. The doors closed behind her, and for the first time since the cathedral. Moira was alone. The silence pressed in. Heavy, unforgiving. Her shoulders finally dropped, the strength she had forced all day slipping away as she moved slowly toward the center of the room. This morning, she had been a bride. Hopeful, prepared, certain of her path. Now, she was a queen. In a marriage she didn't understand. To a man she couldn't read. Her reflection caught in the mirror. The same dress. The same face. But everything else had changed. Her chest tightened as the memory hit her again. He has gone to be with his first love. The words still burned. Still cut deep. And no matter what had happened after, that pain hadn't disappeared. It had only been interrupted. A sharp knock on the door broke through her thoughts. Moira straightened instantly. Enter. The door opened slowly. And there he was. Rayland. Again. Her breath stilled, but this time she didn't let it show. You move fast, she said, her tone carefully neutral. His gaze swept over the room briefly before settling on her. I wanted to make sure the terms were clear. Of course. Back to business. Back to the arrangement. Moira crossed her arms slightly. Go on. Rayland stepped further inside, the door closing quietly behind him. The air shifted instantly. Smaller. Tighter. More dangerous. We present a united front in public, he said. No cracks, no hesitation, no room for speculation. Agreed. In private, he continued, we keep our distance, no unnecessary entanglements. Her jaw tightened slightly. Also agreed. A pause. Then, if anyone asks, he added, his voice lowering slightly, this marriage was always the plan. Moira let out a quiet, humorless laugh. That's hard to believe when I was just abandoned at the altar. His gaze sharpened. You weren't abandoned, he said firmly. The words hit harder than she expected. You were claimed. Silence fell between them. Heavy. Charged. Moira's heart betrayed her again, skipping, tightening, reacting in ways she didn't understand. This is exactly what I mean, she said, her voice softer now, more cautious. You say things like that and it stops sounding like an arrangement. Rayland didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took another step closer. Then another. Closing the distance she hadn't realized was shrinking. Maybe that's because, he said quietly, you're starting to feel it too. Her pulse quickened. No, she said, though it came out barely above a whisper. But he didn't stop. Now he was close. Too close. Close enough that the air between them felt charged with something neither of them was willing to name. Then tell me, he murmured, his gaze locked onto hers, why you haven't asked me to leave. Her breath caught. Because she didn't have an answer. Because a part of her, a dangerous, unguarded part, didn't want him to. And that terrified her. Moira took a small step back, forcing space between them, forcing clarity back into her mind. This is exactly what we're avoiding, she said, her voice steadier now. Complications. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not anger. Not frustration. Something quieter. Something restrained. Right, he said. Just one word. But it carried weight. Finality. He stepped back. The distance returned. The tension shifted. And just like that, the moment was over. "I'll have dinner sent up," he added, his tone once again controlled. "You should rest." Moira nodded, though something inside her felt unsettled. "Unfinished." Raylan turned toward the door. Then paused. "Just for a second." Without looking back, he said, "This arrangement only works if we both remember why we agreed to it." And then he left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. But the silence that followed was louder than anything before. Moira stood there, her heart still racing, her thoughts tangled in something she couldn't quite name. Because deep down, she knew one thing. This wasn't just a dangerous arrangement anymore. It was becoming something far more unpredictable. And if she wasn't careful, it wouldn't just cost her reputation. It would cost her heart. The thought refused to leave Moira's mind, not that night, not even as exhaustion dragged her into restless sleep. Because even in her dreams, he was there. Not the alpha king the world feared, but the man who had looked at her like she mattered, long before she ever realized it. Morning came too quickly. A soft knock echoed through her chambers before the curtains were drawn open, letting golden light spill across the room. "Your Majesty," a maid said gently, bowing her head, "the court awaits you." The court? Of course. Reality didn't pause for emotions. Moira sat up slowly, her body heavy, her thoughts heavier. Yesterday she had been abandoned. Last night she had been married. Today she had to rule. Or at least pretend she was ready to. The throne room was already filled when she arrived. Nobles lined both sides, their expressions carefully neutral, but their eyes, sharp, curious, watching her every move. Waiting for weakness. Waiting for cracks. At the far end of the halls, he sat on the throne. Rayland, effortless, commanding, untouchable. Like he had always belonged there. Like nothing about yesterday had shaken him at all. But when Moira stepped into the room, his gaze shifted, locked onto her instantly. And for just a second, something softened. It was gone before anyone else could notice. But she saw it, and it unsettled her more than the scrutiny of the entire court. Her Majesty Queen Moira. The announcement echoed loudly. Every eye turned to her. This was it. Her first step into this new role. Moira lifted her chin and walked forward, each step steady, controlled. She could feel their judgment pressing against her skin, but she refused to let it show. When she reached the throne, she didn't hesitate. She sat beside him. The movement was simple, but the message powerful. A murmur passed through the room. Approval from some, disapproval from others. But no one spoke against it. Not openly. Not yet. "Let us begin," Raylan said, his voice cutting cleanly through the tension. The court session moved quickly, discussions of land, trade, alliances. But beneath it all, Moira felt it. A shift. A tension that had nothing to do with politics, and everything to do with her. Then, a voice broke through. Sharp, calculated. "Your Majesty," one of the elder nobles said, stepping forward. "While we acknowledge the necessity of yesterday's unexpected union, there are concerns." Moira's fingers tightened slightly against the armrest. "Here it comes." Raylan didn't move. "Speak." The noble bowed slightly, though his eyes flickered briefly toward Moira. The treaty was arranged through Prince Jonan. His absence and replacement raises questions about its legitimacy. A pause. Then, more pointedly, and the Queen's position within this court. The room went still. The attack was subtle, but deliberate. Moira felt it like a blade pressing against her dignity. She could respond. She should respond. But before she could, Raylan spoke. "Careful," he said, his tone calm, too calm. The kind of calm that came before something dangerous. You're walking a very thin line. The noble hesitated but pressed on. With respect, Your Majesty, the people will question. They can question, Raylan interrupted smoothly. His gaze shifted slightly darker now. Colder. But they will not disrespect. Silent. Heavy. Unyielding. The noble swallowed but didn't back down completely. And what assurance do we have, he continued, that this marriage is more than a reaction to circumstance? Moira's chest tightened. That question, it struck deeper than she expected. Because she didn't know the answer either. For the first time since entering the room, Raylan leaned back slightly in his throne, his expression almost thoughtful. As if considering how to respond. Then, his hand moved. Slowly. Deliberately. Until it rested over hers. The contact was sudden. Firm. Warm. And impossible to ignore. Moira's breath caught. Her instincts screamed to pull away. But she didn't. Because this wasn't just a gesture. It was a statement. Raylan's gaze swept across the court. Cold, dominant, final. Let me make something very clear, he said. His thumb brushed lightly against her hand, subtle, controlled, but enough to send a shock through her entire body. This was not a reaction. The room held its breath. This, he continued, his voice dropping slightly, is a decision I should have made a long time ago. Moira's heart stopped. Just for a second. The words hit harder than anything else that had happened since yesterday. Because they didn't sound political. They didn't sound strategic. They sounded real. The noble stepped back, clearly shaken. No further questions, Your Majesty. Good, Raylan replied simply. The message was clear. The discussion was over. But Moira's thoughts, they were just beginning. The court session ended, but the tension followed her. Through the halls. Through the whispers. Through every glance that lingered just a little too long. By the time she reached the quieter wing of the palace, her mind was racing. What did he mean? A long time ago. Before she could stop herself, she turned. And there he was. As if he had been expecting her to. Raylan stood at the end of the corridor, his presence filling the space effortlessly. Waiting. Always waiting. You shouldn't say things like that, she said immediately, her voice lower now, but no less intense. His brow lifted slightly. Like what? Moira stepped closer, her frustration finally surfacing. That this is something you should have done a long time ago. That's not part of the arrangement. A flicker of something crossed his face. Is that what this is about? He asked. What else would it be about? He took a step forward. Then another. Closing the distance between them again. Too easily. Too naturally. You tell me, he said quietly. Her pulse quickened. This isn't a game, Raylan. I know. Then stop blurring the lines. Silent. Heavy. Then, what if the lines were never clear to begin with? Her breath caught. The words lingered between them, charged with something deeper than she was ready to face. No, she said, shaking her head slightly, you don't get to do that. Do what? Act like this means something more, when we both agreed it doesn't. Raylan's gaze darkened slightly, not with anger but something more restrained. Moira dangerous. And if it does, he asked. Her heart stuttered. It doesn't. Too fast. Too defensive. Too uncertain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them stretched thin, ready to snap. Then, Raylan exhaled quietly and stepped back. The distance returned. But the feeling didn't. Then we stick to the arrangement, he said calmly. But something in his voice had changed. Something quieter. Something controlled. Moira nodded, even though the air between them still felt too heavy. Good. But as she turned to walk away, His voice stopped her. One question. She paused. Didn't turn. What? She asked. A beat. Then, when he left you, Raylan said quietly, did you love him? The question hit harder than anything else. Moira's chest tightened instantly. The memory, the pain, the humiliation. All of it rushed back. But this time, it felt different. Because now, there was something else tangled in it. Something new. Something she didn't understand. No, she said finally. Her voice softer. Honest. And for the first time. Certain. A pause. Then footsteps. Approaching. Slow. Measured. Raylan stopped just behind her. Close enough that she could feel him, but not touching. Good, he murmured. The word sent a quiet shiver down her spine. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Something else. Something deeper. And as he walked past her, leaving her standing there alone in the corridor, one truth settled heavily in her chest. There was more to this story. Maury to him. Maury to them. And whatever it was. It had been there long before she ever stood at that altar, that truth followed Moira like a shadow. Through the long corridors. Through the quiet meals sent to her chambers. Through every glance she avoided, and every thought she couldn't. Because now everything felt different. Not just the palace. Not just her title. Him. Days passed. But not in peace. In tension. In awareness. In something that refused to settle. They played their roles perfectly in public. At court, Raylan was everything a king should be, commanding, decisive, untouchable. And beside him, Moira was the perfect queen, poised, elegant, unshaken. Together they were flawless. Unbreakable. Untouchable. But in private, they were strangers walking a dangerous line. Avoiding. Careful. Measured. Until they weren't. It happened on a night that felt too quiet. Too still. The kind of silence that makes thoughts louder. Moira stood on her balcony, the cool night air brushing against her skin as she looked out over the kingdom. From here, everything looked peaceful. Simple. But inside her, nothing was. Her mind kept replaying it. Did you love him? No. The truth had come easily. Too easily. And that was what unsettled her. Because if she hadn't loved Jonan, then why had it hurt so much? And worse, why was that pain slowly being replaced by something else? Something far more dangerous. A soft sound behind her broke the silence. The door. She didn't turn. Didn't need to. She knew. You're going to start making a habit of appearing unannounced, she said quietly. A pause. Then, only when you're trying to avoid me. Her breath caught slightly. Of course he noticed. He always noticed. Moira exhaled slowly before turning. Raylan stood just inside the room, his presence filling the space without effort. No crown, no court, no distance. Just him. And somehow, that was more dangerous. You shouldn't be here, she said, though her voice lacked the firmness it once had. Neither should you, he replied. It's cold. I needed air. You needed space. Their eyes locked. Too honest. Too direct. Too much. Moira looked away first. I thought we agreed to keep things simple. A quiet chuckle escaped him, but there was no humor in it. That was before you started looking at me like that. Her head snapped back toward him. Like what? Raylan took a step closer. Then another. Slow. Intentional. Like you're trying to figure me out, he said. Her pulse quickened. I am. Dangerous habit. So is stepping into someone else's life without explanation. A pause. The tension shifted. Deepened. Then ask, he said. Her breath stilled. Ask what? Whatever it is you want to know. The offer hung between them. Tempting. Risky. Real. Moira hesitated. Because there were questions. Too many. But only one mattered in that moment. Why me? The words came out softer than she expected. Moira vulnerable. Moira honest. Raylan didn't answer immediately. For the first time. He looked away. Just briefly. As if considering how much truth to give. Then he looked back at her. And stepped closer. Close enough that the distance between them felt intentional. Meaningful. Because it was always you, he said quietly. Her heart stopped. What does that mean? She whispered. It means, he continued, his voice low, steady, you were never just my brother's future wife. The world tilted. You're not making sense. I am, he said, you're just not ready to hear it. Her chest tightened. Then don't say it. A beat. Then, too late. The air shifted. Something unspoken rising between them. Something that had been building since the moment he stood up in that cathedral. Moira's breath became uneven. This isn't part of the arrangement, she said again, but this time it sounded more like a warning to herself. Raylan didn't argue. Didn't step back. Didn't break eye contact. No, he said softly, it's not. And that was the problem. Because neither of them were pretending anymore. Not really. The distance between them disappeared without either of them noticing when. Or maybe, they both noticed. And chose not to stop it. Moira felt it first. The shift. The pull. The way her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her heart racing. Her breath catching. Her thoughts slipping. This is a mistake, she whispered. But she didn't move. Didn't step away. Didn't break the moment. Raylan's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, then back to her eyes. Then stop me. The words were quiet. But they held weight. Choice. Permission. And something far more dangerous. Truth. Moira's heart pounded. She should stop him. She knew she should. This was exactly what they agreed to avoid. Complications. Emotions. Attachment. But instead, she stayed. And that was answer enough. When he kissed her this time, it was different. Not for the court. Not for appearances. Not for power. It was slow. Intentional. Real. And it unraveled something deep inside her. Her fingers tightened slightly against him, her body betraying every wall she had tried to build. Because this wasn't strategy. This wasn't survival. This was something else entirely. Something she didn't understand. Something she wasn't ready for. And yet, she didn't pull away. Didn't stop it. Didn't want to. When they finally broke apart, the silence between them was louder than before. He didn't step back immediately. Neither did she. Their breaths mixed. Their thoughts tangled. Their reality shifting. This changes things, Moira said softly. Raylan's gaze didn't waver. It already has. Her chest tightened. Because he was right. The moment he stood up in that cathedral. Everything had changed. But now, there was no going back. No pretending. No clean lines. Because what started as a fake marriage was becoming something far too real. And the most dangerous part. She wasn't sure she wanted to stop it anymore, and that was the most dangerous realization of all. Because once you stop fighting something, you start falling into it. The days that followed felt different. Not louder. Not more dramatic. Just heavier. charged with something unspoken. Something that lingered in every glance, every silence, every moment they stood just a little too close. Moira noticed it first in the smallest ways. The way Raylan's eyes found her in every room, no matter how crowded. The way his voice softened, just slightly when he spoke to her. The way her body responded, even when her mind told her not to. And then there were the nights. The quiet ones, where sleep didn't come easily. Because her thoughts were no longer her own. They were filled with him. His voice. His touch. That kiss. The memory of it refused to fade. And that terrified her. But what terrified her more was how quickly everything else began to change. It started subtly. A wave of dizziness during court. A moment of weakness she quickly masked. A strange, persistent exhaustion that no amount of rest seemed to fix. Moira ignored it at first. She had to. There was too much at stake. Too many eyes watching. Too many expectations. But her body didn't care about expectations. And it didn't stay quiet for long. Your Majesty. The voice sounded distant. Too distant. Moira blinked slowly, trying to focus as the room tilted slightly around her. The court blurred. The voices became noise. And then, darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. Her fingers tightened against the armrest. Not here. Not now. But it was too late. The next thing she felt was warmth. Strong, steady, familiar. Moira. Her name. Low, controlled. But laced with something she had never heard from him before. Fear. Her eyes fluttered open. And there he was. Rayland. Too close. Too tense. Holding her. The entire court had fallen silent. Every eye on them. Every breath held. I'm fine, she murmured, though her voice felt distant, even to herself. You're not, he said immediately. No hesitation. No distance. Just certainty. His grip tightened slightly, as if grounding her. As if refusing to let her slip away again. I just need. You need a physician. Her heart stuttered. No, the word came too quickly. Too sharply. Too revealing. Raylan's gaze narrowed slightly. Why not? Because she already knew. Or at least, a part of her did. A part she wasn't ready to face. Because it's nothing, she insisted, pulling slightly away from him. Just exhaustion. But he didn't let go. Didn't move. Didn't look convinced. The tension between them shifted again. From something unspoken to something dangerously close to truth. Hours later, the palace was quieter. But Moira was. She paced her chambers, her thoughts racing, her heartbeat refusing to settle. It couldn't be. The timing didn't make sense. Or maybe it did. And that was what scared her most. A soft knock echoed at the door. She froze. Because she knew who it was. Enter. The door opened slowly. Raylan stepped inside. And this time, there was no distance. No control. No mask. Just him. And the tension he carried with him. You collapsed, he said, his voice low but firm. I didn't collapse. You lost consciousness in the middle of court. I'm fine. You're not. The silence that followed was sharp. Tight. Breaking. Moira turned away from him, her arms wrapping slightly around herself. I said I'm fine. And I said you're not, he repeated, stepping closer. Closer. Always closer. Why are you fighting this? Her breath caught. Because he was right. She wasn't just avoiding the truth. She was fighting it. Because I don't need this right now, she whispered. Need what? The question hung in the air. Heavy. Unavoidable. Moira closed her eyes briefly. Then, she said it. I think I'm pregnant. Silence. Not just quiet. Still, as if the entire world had paused to hear those words. Moira didn't turn around. Didn't look at him. Because she didn't know what she would see. Shock, anger, regret. This isn't possible, he said finally. The words were calm. Controlled. But they still hit. Moira's chest tightened. I know, she said softly, that's what makes it complicated. Because the truth was, the timeline didn't favor them. Didn't favor him. And in a world like this, that mattered a lot. Slowly she turned and faced him. This is exactly why we shouldn't have crossed that line, she continued. This changes everything. But Raylan wasn't reacting the way she expected. He wasn't angry. Wasn't distant. Wasn't questioning her. He was watching her. Carefully. Intensely. As if trying to understand something deeper than the situation itself. Are you sure? He asked. The question was quiet. But not accusing. Not doubting. Just certain. Moira hesitated. Then nodded. I feel it. A pause. Then, everything changed. Raylan stepped closer. Not away. Not back. Forward. And when he spoke again, his voice wasn't cold. Wasn't distant. Wasn't strategic. It was something else entirely. Then we deal with it. Moira blinked. That's it. That's it. Her brows pulled together slightly. You don't even want to ask. No, the word cut through her. Firm. Final. Unshaken. I don't. Her heart stuttered. Raylan, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, he interrupted, his gaze locking onto hers. And then, he said the words that changed everything. Whatever that child is, it's mine. Her breath caught. The world tilted again. Don't say that, she whispered. But he didn't hesitate. Didn't soften. Didn't take it back. I will say it, he said, and I'll say it again in front of anyone who dares to question it. Her chest tightened. Why? She asked, her voice breaking slightly now. Because this didn't make sense. None of it did. This wasn't strategy anymore. This wasn't just protection. This was something else. Something deeper. Something she didn't understand. Raylan stepped closer again. Until there was no space left between them. Because, he said quietly, I'm not losing you to uncertainty. Her heart stopped. And I'm not letting anyone use this against you. The words wrapped around her like something solid. Something real. Something dangerously close to comfort. Moira's breath trembled. This isn't your responsibility. His gaze didn't waver. It became my responsibility the moment I married you. Silence fell again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was something else. Something steady. Something that felt like safety. And that scared her more than anything else. Because now, this wasn't just about a marriage. Or a deal. Or even a growing connection. This was bigger. More permanent. More real. And as that truth settled deep in her chest, one question refused to stay quiet. Was she ready for what this would turn them into? Or had they already crossed the point of no return? The answer came faster than Moira expected. Because the palace was already turning against her. It started with whispers. Soft at first. Careful. But whispers have a way of growing teeth. She fainted. Too soon. Do you think? Moira felt it everywhere. In the way servants bowed just a second too long. in the way nobles avoided her gaze, or held it with quiet suspicion. In the silence that followed her into every room. They knew, or at least, they suspected. And in a kingdom built on power and bloodlines, suspicion was enough to destroy her. 3 days later, it exploded. The court was packed. More crowded than usual. More tense. More expectant. Moira felt it the moment she stepped inside. This wasn't routine. This was a setup. And at the center of it was her. She walked forward anyway, her posture straight, her expression calm. But inside, her heart was anything but steady. Beside her, Raylan was silent. Too silent. But his presence, it was different today. Sharper, colder, like something had already made him dangerous before they even entered the room. When they reached the throne, they sat together, united, or at least, that's what it looked like. Your Majesty, a voice rang out. The same elder noble from before. But this time, he wasn't alone. Several others stood behind him. A quiet alliance. A challenge. Raylan didn't respond immediately. He simply watched. Waiting. Speak, he said finally. The noble stepped forward, his expression composed, but his eyes. They held intent. We come before you today with concern for the stability of the throne and the integrity of the royal bloodline. Moira's fingers tightened slightly. Here it comes. The Queen's recent condition, the noble continued carefully, raises questions that cannot be ignored. The room went still. Every word was deliberate, calculated, cruel. We must consider the possibility, he added, his voice lowering slightly, that the child she carries may not be of royal origin. The words landed like a strike. Not loud, not dramatic, but devastating. A ripple spread through the court. Shock, curiosity, judgment. Moira's chest tightened painfully. This was her worst fear made public. Her past, her uncertainty, her vulnerability, laid bare for everyone to dissect. She could feel their eyes now. Not just watching, judging, measuring, waiting for her to break. Her throat tightened, but she refused to let it show. Refused to let them see weakness. But inside, something cracked. And then, Raylan moved. It was subtle at first. A shift in posture. A slow exhale. But the moment his hand reached for hers, the entire room felt it. Power, danger, finality. His fingers intertwined with hers. Firm, unyielding. And this time, there was no hesitation. Moira's breath caught. Because this wasn't just support. This was a declaration. Say that again. Raylan's voice was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes people regret speaking at all. The noble hesitated. But only for a second. We are questioning the legitimacy of the heir. Careful, Raylan interrupted softly. The word sliced through the air. Not raised. Not forced. But lethal. The noble's composure faltered, but he pressed on. The kingdom deserves certainty, Your Majesty, and without it we risk. You risk nothing, Raylan said. Now, his voice had changed. Lower, darker, unforgiving. The kind of tone that reminded everyone exactly who sat on that throne. You forget your place. Silent, heavy, crushing. But the noble wasn't done. And if the people begin to question, they won't. The interruption was immediate. Absolute. Because now, Raylan was standing. And the entire room felt it. Power shifted. Completely. He stepped down from the throne slowly. deliberately, each step echoing across the marble floor like a warning. No one moved. No one spoke. No one dared. Until he stopped. Right in front of them. The nobles who had just challenged the queen. Who had just challenged him. Raylan's gaze swept across them. Cold. Dominant. Unshaken. You want certainty, he said. No one answered. No one could. Because the air itself felt too heavy to breathe. Then, he turned. Back toward the throne. Back toward her. Moira's heart pounded as he approached. Because there was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Not restraint. Not control. But something raw. Something undeniable. He stopped in front of her. And then, without hesitation, he reached for her again, pulling her gently to her feet. The room held its breath. "What are you doing?" she whispered. But he didn't answer. Not her. Not yet. Instead, he turned to face the court, still holding her hand, still grounding her, still claiming her. And then, the Alpha King spoke. "My queen carries my child." The words didn't echo. They landed. Heavy, final, unbreakable. A wave of shock crashed through the room. But one of the nobles started. Raylan didn't even look at him. Didn't acknowledge him. Because he wasn't finished. "And let me make something else clear," he continued, his voice sharp now. "Anyone who questions her questions me." Silence. Absolute. Terrifying. "Anyone who disrespects her," he added, his grip tightening slightly around Moira's hand, "answers to me." No one spoke. No one moved. Because in that moment, they understood. This wasn't politics anymore. This wasn't strategy. This was personal. Moira's heart raced. Her thoughts tangled. Her emotions impossible to control. Because this wasn't part of the arrangement. This wasn't expected. This wasn't calculated. This was him choosing her. Fully, publicly, irrevocably. Slowly Raylan turned back to her. The room disappeared. The noise faded. Until it was just them again. Like it had been in the cathedral. Like it had always been. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said quietly. Her breath trembled. "You don't even know if it's..." "I don't care." The words came instantly. Without doubt. Without hesitation. Without fear. And that broke something inside her. Not painfully. Not completely. But enough to let something else in. Something warmer. Something real. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. But her voice. It betrayed her. "Why?" she whispered. Raylan's gaze softened. "Just slightly. Just enough." "Because it's you," he said. Simple. Honest. Devastating. And in that moment, Moira understood. This was never just about saving her. Never just about the throne. Never just about a deal. It had always been deeper. Longer. Stronger. And as the court stood in stunned silence, as the whispers died, as the power shifted completely in her favor, one truth settled deep in her heart. She hadn't just been claimed by the Alpha King. She had been chosen. And this time, she wasn't standing alone anymore, and for the first time since that day at the altar, Moira finally allowed herself to feel it. Not the fear. Not the uncertainty. Not the humiliation that once threatened to define her. But something else. Something stronger. Something steady. Something real. The court slowly began to clear, one by one, the weight of Raylan's declaration still hanging thick in the air. No one challenged him. No one dared. Because they had all seen it. Not just his power, but his choice. And in a world where power ruled everything, choice meant even more. Moira stood there for a moment longer, her hand still in his, her heart still racing, not from fear this time, but from something she had spent so long trying to deny. When she finally looked up at him, truly looked, she didn't see the Alpha King. Not the ruler. Not the strategist. Not the man who stepped in to save a broken moment. She saw the man who had been there all along. Watching, waiting, choosing, even when she didn't notice. Even when she belonged to someone else. Even when it wasn't his place to. And somehow, that realization hit deeper than everything else. You meant it, she said softly. Not a question. Not entirely. Raylan didn't let go of her hand. Didn't look away. I don't say things I do mean. Her breath caught. Because she believed him. Not because of what he said in court. But because of everything he had done before that moment. The way he stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. The way he protected her when it wasn't required. The way he chose her, again and again, without asking for anything in return. And suddenly, everything made sense. Back then, she began slowly, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable than it had ever been, when you said you should have done this a long time ago. She hesitated. Because now, she was ready for the answer. What did you mean? The question lingered between them. But this time, she didn't run from it. Raylan's expression shifted slightly. Not guarded. Not distant. Just honest. I meant, he said quietly, that I should have chosen you before anyone else had the chance. Her heart stopped. Not painfully. Not sharply. But completely. Because those words, they weren't dramatic. They weren't loud. But they carried years of silence. Years of restraint. Years of something that had never been spoken. Until now. Moira's eyes softened, the walls she had built for so long finally beginning to fall, not all at once, but enough. You waited, she whispered. I had to. Why? A small pause. Then, because you deserved a choice, he said, even if it wasn't me. That was what broke the last of her resistance. Not his power. Not his claim. But his patience. His restraint. His willingness to let her be free, even if it meant losing her. And in that moment, Moira understood something most people never do. Love isn't always loud. It isn't always immediate. And it isn't always easy. Sometimes, it waits. It protects. It stands back until the right moment. And then it steps forward. When it matters most. Her grip on his hand tightened slightly. This time, not out of uncertainty, but out of choice. I wasn't ready before, she admitted. Raylan didn't respond. He didn't need to. But I am now. The words were quiet. But they carried everything. Trust. Acceptance. Something deeper than either of them had planned. For the first time, there was no tension between them. No confusion. No arrangement. No pretending. Just truth. And maybe that was the greatest twist of all. Because what started as humiliation became protection. What started as an arrangement became connection. What started as something forced became something chosen. Moira stepped closer to him, her voice softer now, but stronger than ever. This wasn't part of the plan. A faint smile touched Raylan's lips. It never was. And as the weight of everything settled, not as a burden, but as something solid, something real. Moira realized something she wished she had understood sooner. Sometimes the worst moment of your life is the moment everything begins to change. Sometimes rejection isn't the end. It's redirection. And sometimes the love you didn't choose at first is the one that chooses you, completely, fearlessly, and without hesitation. She was never meant to be abandoned. She was meant to be found. And this time, when the Alpha King held her, it wasn't to save her. It was because he never intended to let her go.